Hello. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to be here. So again, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about this Learning Disability Awareness Month event that the pre-college programs have put together, and I'm excited to share some information with you today. A little bit about me. My name is Dr. Victoria Suarez. My educational background consists of having a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and a doctorate degree. My bachelor's degree is in psychology, my master's degree is in behavioral psychology, and my doctorate degree is in applied behavior analysis, which is the science of learning and behavior. And if you're familiar with ABA or applied behavior analysis at all, you might be familiar with it as a service for individuals with autism, as that is the primary population that receives applied behavior analytics services. For my work, I'm a clinician and I work with individuals with unique learning abilities. These include abilities like having unique needs with diagnoses such as ADHD or autism spectrum disorder, among many others. I'm also a university professor at Pepperdine University, where I teach students that are receiving their coursework to become applied behavior analysis technicians or behavior analysts at the master's level that seek to work in ABA. And I'm also a researcher, and I research different ways to teach different skills to individuals with unique learning abilities, as well as ways to enhance students' experiences and disseminate the overall science of learning and behavior to many applications. My inspiration for coming into this field really started at a young age, as I always loved working with students. In high school, I taught ballet classes to young baby ballerinas. I was a dancer growing up, and I really enjoyed doing that. And I have a brother who has autism spectrum disorder. So when I graduated with my bachelor's degree in psychology, I was really curious about moving on in my educational experience and learning more about psychology by obtaining a master's degree, but I wasn't quite sure which branch of psychology I wanted to go in. And I heard something about applied behavior analysis and a program related to that and how it had something to do with autism. And the person telling me about it didn't know so much about it. And I didn't know anything about applied behavior analysis. But given that my brother had autism, I was really motivated to learn more about it. So I learned more about it. It sounded really cool. And that's how I fell into the field. So I've been working with individuals with autism and other learning unique abilities since 2015. It's something that I'm really passionate about and I have a lot of fun doing. Oh, some myths about learning disabilities. There are very many myths that go around about individuals that have unique learning abilities or complex diagnoses that impact their learning. And it's important to be familiar with these myths and know the actual truths behind them so that we can have an understanding perspective and an accurate perspective of the experiences of individuals with unique learning abilities or learning disabilities. One common myth is that individuals with learning disabilities cannot learn, and that is very false. In fact, individuals with learning disabilities have unique learning abilities. So although they might not learn in the way that a typically developing individual can learn, that does not mean that they cannot learn. They have unique learning abilities, and individuals who work with those that have unique learning abilities or learning disabilities have to tailor their teaching to make sure that the individual can learn. So if we're not teaching the way that they can learn, we want to modify our teaching so that their learning experience is one that is positive and that they do benefit from. Something really interesting is that for autism spectrum disorder specifically, over 40% of individuals with autism diagnoses actually have an average to above average IQ level. So that would be an IQ level of over 85. So although there are individuals with autism spectrum disorder who do have low IQ or lower than average IQ scores, many of them and almost half have average IQ scores. So it's not always about having a lower intellectual quotient score, but more so about having a unique learning ability that might differ from the typically developing individual. Another common myth is that learning disabilities only affect one's academic performance, meaning that they only affect one's ability to do well in school or do well on academic tasks. And this is also not true. The complexities that are involved in having a learning disability or a complex diagnosis can affect the whole body, and they can actually affect varying aspects of one's life. In terms of affecting the whole body, there are a lot of comorbidities that often exist within an intellectual disability. Sometimes there are heart defects or other gastrointestinal complications, seizure disorders, to name a few, gross and fine motor skill deficits, just so many different complexities that affect the whole body and not just the brain and its ability to perform on academic tasks or school tasks. These learning disabilities also affect varying aspects of one's life. So not only one's performance in school, but also their performance in maintaining and building relationships, or their performance in finding and being successful at different hobbies. There are so many different aspects of one's life that are impacted with a learning disability, and it's important to consider how one's learning disability impacts all aspects of that individual's experience as a human being. Another common myth is that you can see one's learning disability, meaning that there's something you can observe that lets you know that they have a learning disability. For example, being in a wheelchair or having a unique appearance. That is not always the case. Sometimes one's learning disability cannot be observed, and they may appear to look like any other typically developing individual, while in fact struggling with a learning disability that impacts their life overall and their performance in school or other academic tasks as well. Another myth is that adults can grow out of a learning disability. This is not necessarily true. There are some things to consider with adulthood and growing up as an individual who's been diagnosed with a learning disability early on. So, for example, if one is diagnosed with a learning disability early on as a young child, they might have increased supports because since they were very young, they were receiving supports and services to help them manage their learning disability. And so as they grow older, they might have more skills and more tools to be successful with managing that disability. On the contrary, though, there may be individuals who don't learn about their learning disability or receive a diagnosis for their learning disability until later on in life. And so the supports that they receive might have been received later on, which means that they don't have as many tools or resources to manage their learning disability as they grow up and become adults and enter adulthood. Also, something important to consider with this is that supports and needs change throughout the lifespan. So the supports and needs of a young learner who's maybe in elementary school are going to be very different than the supports and needs of a young adult who is maybe experiencing complex emotions as a result of puberty and complex relationship difficulties as a result of entering romantic relationships and things like that. So while adults can obtain tools and skills to help them be successful, it's also important to consider that adulthood comes with increased complexities that we don't necessarily deal with in our early childhood life or early young adult life. And so there's always supports and needs that have to change to adjust to the individual's needs and areas of support as they grow older. Another myth is that individuals with learning disabilities don't experience complex emotions. And this is also not true. Emotions may be expressed differently by those who have unique learning abilities or learning disabilities, but that doesn't mean that they don't experience emotions, especially with individuals who are really greatly impacted by their learning disability or their learning disability is more severe. It can be really difficult to observe their expression of emotion because it's so different from that expression of emotion of a typically developing individual. But that doesn't mean that they don't experience emotions. It just means that they express them differently. And so we want to be aware of this so that we are still sensitive to individuals that have unique learning abilities, and we understand that their life experience still results in complex emotions just like everyone else's, even though it might not look the same. How to get tested for a learning disability. There are different ways that you can seek testing for a learning disability. One way is to visit your school psychologist, talk about your experience, and receive an assessment from them. An assessment from a school psychologist typically consists of answering a questionnaire or doing different little tests with them to assess your skills in different areas and to arrange supports if needed in whatever areas could be supported. Another way to get tested for a learning disability is to consult with a medical doctor. So visiting your primary care doctor and asking them about ways that you can seek testing for a learning disability is an option. Oftentimes they'll ask you about your experience in your academic tasks or in your school performance, as well as your experience with your relationships and other areas of life, like staying organized and completing home chores and so on, to get a good picture of how you might be impacted by whatever it is that you're dealing with, and then assessing whether whatever is occurring in your life is a result of or related to a learning difficulty or disability. Tools to stay organized if managing a learning disability. If you're managing or know someone who is managing a learning disability or a unique learning ability, there are some things that you can do to stay organized to help manage that learning disability. If possible, requesting accommodations from your school is always a really great option. Schools typically offer accommodations to learners or students with unique learning abilities or unique learning disabilities, and those accommodations are individualized to help that person specifically but be set up for success. So they might include things like having more time on assignments or tests. Also might include things like having the option to type out notes instead of write out notes and things like that, all totally individualized to that unique person and what might help them best. So requesting accommodations from your school is always a great option, and you can do that by going to your school psychologist again, or even asking your teacher how you can set those up. Another way to stay organized is having someone you can talk to. And that doesn't always sound like something that would help you stay organized, but having someone that you can talk to and express what you're struggling with is a way to get feedback from that person and maybe get some advice too that could be helpful. So having someone that you can talk to and express what you're struggling with or areas that you could seek some support in is a good way to have an open door of communication so that you can get that feedback from another person of what might be helpful for them that you could also try. And it doesn't always have to be a peer or a classmate. It can also be a teacher or an adult that you go to express what you're dealing with. And it doesn't always have to be talking about what you're struggling with. It can also be talking about what you're using that's successful for you so that you can share what's working for you and get some feedback on ways to continue on that path of doing something that's really helpful for you. Another tool to stay organized is keeping a schedule. So keeping a schedule of upcoming assignments and due dates, extracurricular activities and family events so that you have a picture of how everything works together will help you manage your time to make sure that you don't leave anything to the last minute or that you don't double book yourself and have like a big assignment due at the same time as a family event, and allow you to pre-plan so that you can fit the most into your schedule without it feeling chaotic or abrupt. Another tool to stay organized is to ask questions. Ask other students what they do, ask teachers what you can do, and just ask questions on what overall you can achieve with the resources that you have. So for example, if your teacher posts assignments online, you can ask questions about getting those assignments early or submitting assignments in a unique way that might work best for you. You never know the answer until you ask the question. So always ask questions to see if there are options for you that you may have not thought of or been aware of before. And then lastly, have a plan. So if you know that you have different courses, for example, with tests coming up on dates that maybe are at the same time and that's stressful, you can have a plan to maybe study for one test one week and another test the other week, or ask questions about extending the time for your test and have a plan on how you'll use that time and so on. And all of these really work together. So there's not one tool that will be the tool maybe that works best, but really it's about using all the tools that you can to promote as much success as possible. And finally, how to support others with learning disabilities. We will encounter individuals with learning disabilities, as having a learning disability is something that is quite common. In fact, many individuals struggle with learning disabilities. And so we want to practice being an ally. And that means that we're supportive and encouraging of all learning abilities. We want to engage in perspective taking and consider, how would I feel if I was in this person's shoes? Or what would it be like if I had this unique learning ability? And that perspective taking can help us have some compassion and empathy. Another way to support individuals with learning disabilities or unique learning abilities is to find similarities or commonalities. Think about, what do I have in common with this person? In what ways are we similar? Maybe we have similar interests and we like the same sports team, or maybe we both really don't like math. And in fact, there's research to support that when we find similarities or commonalities with other people and we think about how we might be like them in some way, that actually increases how empathetic we are towards that individual. So just practicing finding similarities and commonalities can be a way to really promote your empathy towards these individuals with unique learning abilities in a way that you maybe hadn't done before. We also want to be inclusive. If there's a group activity, always include all members of your class, including members that may have unique learning abilities. If there's maybe a lunchroom activity where there's a group of people together, include as many individuals as possible. And finally, demonstrate kindness. Even the smallest acts, like complimenting somebody on their outfit or letting somebody know that you appreciated what they did the other day, very small acts of kindness can go a really long way. So challenge yourself to do one thing, say one thing to individuals with unique learning abilities to promote that kindness and to show them that you are an ally and that you're a supportive member of their community. So again, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and share this information with you. If you have any questions, I know I'm not here in person, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have, either by sending them over via email or asking them through social media. So thank you so much and have a great day.